40 years ago this month, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin first set foot on the moon. I'm Kathleen Koch. This desert in New Mexico, where I'm standing, is about to bear witness to similar history. Construction is beginning on the first commercial-purpose spaceport in the entire world, where, if you're willing to pay the price, you can take a ride into suborbital space complete with zero gravity.
Thank you so much. You know, today history is being made. Today will be a signal that America needs to regain its leadership in space, both national space and commercial space. Today is history because New Mexico leads the nation in commercial space.
New Mexico's weather and wide-open spaces have been ideal for the aerospace industry since Robert Goddard, the father of modern rocketry, began conducting research in Roswell, New Mexico in the 1930s. Later, Wernher von Braun developed his V-2 rocket here in the 1940s, culminating in the Saturn V and the Apollo moon landing. In the early 1990s, a group of individuals called the Southwest Space Task Force began collecting data and information to support their case. They found this area in the New Mexico desert on 27 square miles of state-owned land not far from the city of Las Cruces. They took their case to New Mexico's Economic Development Cabinet Secretary Rick Homans, who presented the idea of a New Mexico spaceport to Governor Bill Richardson. Richardson at the time was negotiating with the X Prize Foundation to locate the X Prize Cup in New Mexico and was spearheading legislation to finance the spaceport. Breaking new ground is the slogan here at the spaceport, and Executive Director Steve Landine tells us they mean that both literally and figuratively.
That's correct. When you look at what we're embarking on, and the spaceports are an enabler. So Spaceport America represents low-cost, flexible infrastructure to enable these companies to come, whether it's Virgin Galactic, Armadillo Aerospace, and these companies such as XCOR that are going to do wonderful things for transforming space. So when we're breaking new ground, not only is it new ground in the desert here in New Mexico, but it is breaking new ground towards this commercial space, this new space age that's going to industrialize space, similar to the beginnings of the 1900s.
Why did you decide to get involved?
Oh, that's somewhat of a personal thing. This was not a financial decision. This was more of wanting to do something that you can look back on and saying, I've made a difference. And
part of history.
Part of history. So that weighed very heavily in my decision. And when I received a phone call, Spaceport America, and I said, well, tell me about that one. Well, this is a state job. And I said, well, tell me more. Well, there's, Virgin Galactic is involved. And I said, okay. The powerhouse brand of Spaceport America, what New Mexico did to capture that brand, which has such a powerful impact on a global scale of what that means. You put yourself in Europe or Asia and you say Spaceport America, that has instant meaning and a desire and an attraction to it from my perspective. And so when you couple that with Virgin Galactic and the wonderful thing that the Virgin Group has done over the years, both environmentally, their companies, their airline, a rich heritage, and a media machine, that you put the two together, those two ingredients can help propel a new commercial space industry.
One of the leading supporters of the spaceport efforts has been New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. We had a chance to speak with him just before the groundbreaking ceremony.
Governor, when it comes to Spaceport America, virtually everyone agrees it wouldn't be happening without you. Talk to me about it. How did you get inspired by this incredible venture?
Well, I've always been, as a kid, a space buff. I remember when John F. Kennedy said we're going to the moon in 10 years, and I was kind of hoping that the astronaut program, our extensive NASA public commitment to space would continue. So what we wanted to do in New Mexico is be the beachhead for commercial space, partnering with Richard Branson, making New Mexico a center of space, of jobs, of technology, economic development. So I wanted to think big. I'm going to think big for one big thing as governor, and that's a spaceport, because that's the future. That's why we committed over $200 million. I made it a campaign issue. I said this is bipartisan, this is for kids, for science education, for math, for weather, for renewable energy, and here we are, reality coming from a dream.
How tough was that to do, though, in these days and times, this tough economic crisis the nation and the state are in?
Well, it was really tough because of the economic crisis, and a lot of people doubted it, and they said, let's spend the money on domestic needs, on social programs. But I think sometimes public officials need to be bold and look at the future. And I think what awaits us in space is something that we need to discover, whether it's new climate data, whether it's renewable energy, solar and wind, whether it's medicine, whether it's new energy sources. And so it's not just shooting people up into space. It's also discovering the unknown, adventure. And America's been an adventurous country. And this is why I think New Mexico is going to be lauded for taking one of these first steps to bring commercial space to reality.
While the spaceport will stand out in the field of space travel, when it comes to the environment, it's all about fitting in. Much of the spaceport will be buried in this desert sand. The terminal is designed to be environmentally sustainable with a green, energy-efficient design.
My end objective for it, and I share Virgin's passion around the environment. Certainly, Governor Richardson has set standards here in New Mexico and has attracted Shot Solar. Renewable energy, I envision that the spaceport will be 100% renewably powered is my objective. But to start off, what we want to do is put things in the design that can minimize your power consumption. So we have things like earth tubes that will probably reduce our HVAC, the heating and cooling power, by 60 to 70%. So it's those types of elements that we've put into the design, that berming, and taken advantage of that to precondition the air is just a remarkable feature that Foster and Partners and URS, the architect engineers, have put into this building.
And the vision that the people of New Mexico have had to know that they have a future in space. A future that goes back to 1945 and White Sands, goes back to the V2s, which, having made a rather unwelcome visit to London in 1944, were shipped here in 1945. And we were quite glad to see the back of them, I have to tell you. And I work for an organisation whose first word in every project we do is safety. And that's the secret of this location. It's not only the best location for commerciality in space, it's the best location for safety in space as well.
Because of the White Sands missile range, this airspace is restricted, meaning no commercial aircraft will be flying here. This makes it an ideal and safe spot for a spaceport. Stephen Attenborough, CEO of Virgin Galactic, thank you so much for joining us today. Talk to me about, how did Virgin Galactic come about? How did you come up with this idea, or you and what group of people?
It was an idea that was originally born in the late 90s, I think, and it came from Richard Branson, which most of Virgin's ideas generally originate with him. And I think it was when he was doing one of his balloon record attempts, and as was quite frequent in those days, you had to wait for the right weather window, and so they were sitting around chatting about various things, and Buzz Aldrin was amongst the group of people that was with him. And Richard started talking about to Buzz, saying, look, it's interesting and a little frustrating, because when I was a kid in the 60s, my mum told me that everybody would be going on holiday to space by 1982, because the progress at that point in the time was just enormous, and it hasn't happened, and why not? And can we do something about it? And so he and Buzz talked a lot about why the technology hadn't moved as fast as everybody thought it should and could, and came up with one or two potential ideas as to how that could be improved. And Richard was very inspired about that and went out and registered the name of the company. So Virgin Galactic has actually been around for quite a long time as a company. And then we went and looked at various projects around the world and decided to try to find something that we could potentially commercialize. And I think we became very clear in the very early stages of that work that we needed to find something that was going to be very safe, because if you're going to take hundreds and thousands of people to space on a very regular basis, you need to have a system which is fundamentally safe. And then we also needed something which had the potential to be commercially viable, because this is a Virgin business like any other Virgin business, and we're here to make money. And that's very important for the future of this industry as well, because if we're going to be able to do bigger and better things in space, we're going to need a lot of private sector investment, and so we need to prove that it's a commercially attractive thing to do.
Let's talk about the craft itself right now. So it's Burt Rutan's Scaled Composites company. They're the designers of the White Knight 2 and Spaceship 2. So where do those stand? How is it coming?
It's coming very well. I mean, with the reason we chose Burt Rutan in the first place was because we had some experience of his company. They'd built a pretty remarkable aircraft for us called the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer that Steve Fossett flew around the world single-handed in 2005. And it was actually while we were working with Burt and Scaled on that project that we became aware that there was something interesting being built in the corner of the hangar, and found out that he was competing for the X Prize, of course. And the more that we found out about the way that he was thinking about that design, the way that he was building it, and the rationale for the way that he was doing that, we just became very, very excited, because I think we felt that those two key objectives, safety and commercial viability, could just be transformed by the way that he was approaching things. So Burt was the obvious choice, because he built Spaceship One, he flew it into space 3 times in 2004, something that no other private company had ever done. So he did actually what only 3 of the world's most powerful nations had done in the past, and that was to put a man into space. And he did it with a $25-30 million budget from Paul Allen, and he did it in a way which was just really smart. So the air launch from the aircraft at high altitude, huge safety improvement. The use of a hybrid rocket motor, very energy efficient, and a great sort of a safety improvement as well. And then this remarkable but very simple innovation of the wing feathering, which is the way that Spaceship One comes back down through the atmosphere, without sophisticated flight control systems, without pilot input, and without the need for thermal protection. So it was the sort of combination of those design features which really convinced us that this was a plan worth following. So we said to Burt during 2004, look, if you're successful in winning the X Prize, which we think you will be, then we would love to take this forward. So
where does it stand now? When will we see our first launch, our first civilians going up?
Well, this is a project of milestones. We don't have a firm date in the diary for the inaugural flight, because we can't if we're focused on safety. But we're doing well. So the new carrier aircraft is now flying. That was rolled out in July of last year. We've had 9 flights now of that aircraft. It's been up to its launch altitude, which is 51,000 feet.
And how is it performing?
It's performing flawlessly. It's a typical Burt Rutan design. It is extremely unusual. So it's the world's largest carbon composite aircraft ever built. It's probably the world's most fuel-efficient aircraft for that reason. It has a twin boom configuration, so it's a catamaran. And it looks very beautiful. It looks very unusual. And as I say with Burt Rutan, it flies beautifully as well. So the pilots are delighted with it.
I understand that some have some aspirations to take their marriage vows in space. Can you tell us about that? Or has anyone else come up with some interesting or unusual requests they want to accomplish up there?
Yes, I mean we've had artists who want to create a work of art up there. We've had musicians that want to compose something up there. We've certainly have a honeymoon couple who are going to be having at least part of their honeymoon in space. We've had several requests for marriages in space, and I think we'll do that. I'm not sure exactly when that will happen or who will be first. But I was going to say the sky's the limit, but space is the limit for this. It's really, it just opens up a whole realm of possibilities, and everything for incentives for companies that want to reward their best salesmen, through to people that want to get married. It's going to be a great experience.
Well, in conclusion, talking about the sky's the limit, do you have aspirations to launch from other places on the planet, Sweden perhaps?
Yeah, we do. I mean, New Mexico is going to be building our spaceport, so that will be the hub of our operations. It's where our headquarters will be, and it'll be our home effectively. But the advantage of having an air launch system is that we have an aircraft with a long range that can effectively take the spaceship and itself to anywhere in the world. So you're right, in the north of Sweden. I think we'll be there, I hope, fairly soon after the start of commercial operations here, but probably just for a certain amount of months each year where the weather's good. And then I think we'll probably do that in other parts of the world as well. So we may just do it on a temporary basis each year or occasionally, perhaps a little bit like Formula One, so that you sort of go around touring and do a few days or weeks of flights at each location. And then I suspect that we will have more permanent locations in 2 or 3 places in the world where there's a good local market, where there's a good sort of operational base. Because I think people who want to fly twice will probably want to fly from different locations, because if you've seen the view above New Mexico, which will be terrific, it'll also be nice to see the view above the north of Sweden and possibly Australia or wherever else in the world.
Stephen Attenborough, CEO of Virgin Galactic, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jeff Faust is a senior analyst for the Futron Corporation and author of the SpaceflightReview.com and PersonalSpaceflight.info. I asked Jeff what he thinks about Spaceport America and its future here in New Mexico.
Well, Spaceport America is really at the vanguard of this new generation of entrepreneurial space ventures and the infrastructure needed to support these ventures. Companies like Virgin Galactic, which is going to be the anchor tenant of Spaceport America, a number of other companies are developing vehicles to do suborbital and eventually orbital space flights. They need facilities to fly from, and places like Cape Canaveral in Florida and Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, which are existing rocket sites used by NASA and the Defense Department, aren't necessarily the best sites for an emerging commercial startup that needs really a clean sheet to start from. And that's where facilities like Spaceport America step in to really provide a new facility custom designed to meet the needs of these entrepreneurial markets serving new markets like space tourism.
I was going to say that really is the key here, because we're talking about civilians, the average American or average American with $200,000 lying around being able to go into space.
Exactly, and you want to craft the experience for that that's going to best meet their needs to make sure that they feel like they got their $200,000 worth. And providing a entirely custom-built facility with state-of-the-art architecture designed to maximize the user experience is really critical for these ventures to be successful, so that people feel like that they're really part of a space experience from the time they step on the spaceport to the time they leave.
Jeff, with the nation currently struggling under this economic downturn, how do you see that impacting operations at Spaceport America?
Well, obviously there are going to be some people who had the means to afford a flight a year ago who don't necessarily have the means to do so now. But a lot of these, particularly this first group, the first several hundred people, the first several thousand people, these are people who have wanted to fly for years or decades. They grew up watching Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, and they wanted to be astronauts, and they weren't able to become NASA astronauts, but they had this dream to fly into space, and now there's a means for them to realize that dream by saving up enough money to fly to space. So I think you'll see people, find ways to put that money together, even it might be more difficult to do so than it was a year ago, to be able to fly into space. So I think at least in the near term, I don't think you'll see a tremendous impact on demand. Certainly if the economic crisis becomes protracted, extended, you might see an impact over the long term. But certainly in the near term, I think there are enough people who are passionate about flying into space that they're willing to make other sacrifices in order to be able to afford a trip.
Jeff, when it comes to the Spaceport America project, do you see any cons in the way of, say, the environment, any potential hazards or dangers that these launches might pose?
Certainly some people have raised a concern about the carbon footprint of missions like this, flying up into space for what a lot of people consider to be simply joyrides. And in some respect they are. You're flying into space for the sake of the experience of flying into space. And that can seem like something of a luxury at a time when we're concerned not just about the economy, but also about the environment. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is that for each one of these flights, the carbon footprint is very small. It's a tiny fraction of a single commercial airline flight. So even if you have these these vehicles flying every day, you're only going to have a small fraction of the impact of, say, a modern airport in the U.S., let alone commercial aviation in general.
As the anchor tenant of Spaceport America, Virgin Galactic will offer rides into space for roughly $200,000 U.S. But it doesn't stop there. Commercial launch vehicles will be launched from the same site, rocket racecraft will compete from this spaceport, and educational launches will carry student experiments into space. Jerry Larson, president of UP Aerospace, explains.
First of all, tell us about your company. What is UP Aerospace?
Well, UP Aerospace is a small company that launches small payloads into space from Spaceport America. We're incorporated in 2004 and did our first launch from Spaceport America in 2006. And we've since then done 5 launches from Spaceport America. So just a small company trying to create a new marketplace.
Are we talking about orbital, suborbital? Describe exactly the size of these rockets, where they go.
Yeah, what we're launching is what's called suborbital, which means it doesn't have enough speed to actually stay in space. And so it'll go into space, and it'll be there for maybe 5 minutes and be weightless and float in space. It's a lot like the mission that Alan Shepard flew in the early 1960s. That same mission when he was in space for 15 minutes. It's that same mission. And so that's what we're launching now. Orbital is going much faster and actually circling the globe, and it'll stay up in space for a long time.
Talk to me about your typical cargo, because it's very interesting, broad range of things you're setting up.
We've had upwards of 11 clients at a time on a rocket. They all share the ride for economical reasons. And it's ranged from university payloads, experiments and things like that, to energy drinks, which is fascinating. Microgravity that has an energy drink called antimatter. And cremated remains is another one. We've launched Scotty from Star Trek.
Beam me up.
Yeah, James Doohan was his name, and in his will, he wanted to have his ashes sent into space, and so we were contacted by Celestis as a company in Texas to do that in 2007, and that was.
I understand he had some very famous company, though.
He did.
Someone who had already been up there.
Gordon Cooper, who is an astronaut in real life, James Doohan, who played one as an actor, of course. Gordon Cooper, or Gordy, he was one of the original 7 astronauts, and I think he was approached, or his wife was approached, whether they'd be interested in going. Of course, she didn't hesitate, and as a matter of fact, both of the widows, Wendy and Gordon Cooper's wife, were at that launch and got to actually press the firing button to fire the rocket into space, which is a privilege not many people have to be able to do that.
So after some 25 years of planning, a new chapter in the history of suborbital spaceflight has begun. And while initially the number of civilian space tourists will be small, those behind this new venture believe there is vast potential for new developments in many fields that until now have been limited by the force of gravity. I'm Kathleen Koch for Astrocast.tv.